So now let's continue with our review. So in this question, it says to identify the system of inequalities that represents this graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out the three boundary lines that form this triangular region. So one boundary line is the y-axis. The y-axis has the equation x equals 0. Notice that everything to the right of that is shaded, so we can say that's x is greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to eliminate any answer choice that does not include x is greater than or equal to 0. Another boundary line is the x-axis, which has the equation y equals 0. Everything above that is shaded, so that's going to be y is greater than or equal to 0. So now let's make sure that 2x plus 3y is less than or equal to 6 does work for the third boundary line. So if we convert this to slope-intercept form, this is going to be 3y is less than or equal to negative 2x plus 6, and we can divide everything by 3, which gives us y is less than or equal to negative 2/3 x plus 2. So that's going to have a y-intercept at 2 and a slope of down 2 over 3. So let's try plugging in 0, 0 and make sure that it does make this inequality true. So we have 2 times 0 plus 3 times 0 is less than or equal to 6, which tells us that 0 plus 0 is less than or equal to 6. 0 is less than or equal to 6 is true, so that means that this is the correct answer choice. So in this problem, it says, given 3 points of a quadratic function, find the equation that defines the function. So there's more than one way to do this. If you would like, you can create an XY table and then enter these problems into your calculator under Stat Edit, and then choose option 5, which is quadratic regression, to create the equation, right? This will be going into L1 and this will be going into L2. Or you can set up a system of 3 equations to figure out the quadratic function. So to do this, what you're going to do is you're going to plug in each of the points into standard form. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's first plug in negative 2, negative 8. So we have negative 8 equals a times negative 2 squared plus b times negative 2 plus c. So I have negative 8 equals 4a minus 2b plus c. So that's going to be equation number 1. Equation number 2 comes from the point 0, 2. So we have y, so we have 2 equals a times 0 squared plus b times 0 plus c. So that's 2 equals 0 plus 0 plus c. So that tells me that 2 equals c. So that's going to be equation number 2. Equation number 3 we can get by plugging in 2, negative 4. So we have negative 4 equals a times 2 squared plus b times 2 plus c. So we have negative 4 equals 4a plus 2b plus c, which is equation number 3. So our two equations are going to be number 1, which is negative 8 equals 4a minus 2b plus c. And then equation number 3, which is negative 4 equals 4a plus 2b plus c. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this second equation, this 2 equals c, and I'm going to plug it into both these equations to simplify these equations a little bit further. So if I plug in 2 equals c, I have negative 8 equals 4a minus 2b plus 2, and then I can subtract that 2 from both sides. And that gives me negative 10 equals 4a minus 2b. So in this equation, if I plug in c equals 2, I have negative 4 equals 4a plus 2b plus 2, and then I can subtract 2 from both sides, and that gives me negative 6 equals 4a plus 2b. So now you can see I can combine these two starred equations in order to solve for a and b. So if I put them together, I have negative 6 equals 4a plus 2b. And so if I add them together, I have negative 16 equals 4a and 4a is 8a, and then minus 2b and plus 2b cancel out. So I can divide both sides by 8, and so I have negative 2 equals a. Now I'm going to plug into this equation. I have negative 6 equals 4 times negative 2 plus 2b. So I have negative 6 equals 4 times negative 2, which is negative 8 plus 2b. And then I can add 8 to both sides in order to solve for b. So I have 2 equals 2b, and then divide both sides by 2. So I have 1 equals b. Okay, so now I have a value of a, value of b, and a value of c that I can use to write my equation, right? So my equation is going to be in y equals ax squared, so negative 2x squared, plus b, which is 1x, and then plus c, which is 2. Okay, so the answer choice that's going to match is going to be answer choice B, right? Negative 2x squared plus x plus 2. So now in this problem, it wants me to find the equation of the parabola with a focus of 5, 1 and a directrix y equals negative 1. Okay, so if my directrix is at y equals negative 1, that's going to be a horizontal line. Okay, so that means my parabola is going to be a vertical parabola. Since 5, 1 is up here above, my parabola is going to open up. Okay, so I'm going to use this form of the parabola equation. X minus h squared equals 4p y minus k. HK is the midpoint between the focus and the directrix. So if I create a point on my directrix, it's always going to have a y coordinate of negative 1. And then the x coordinate is just going to stay the same because it's right in line with that focal point. So I have 5, negative 1. So HK, the vertex, is going to be the midpoint between the focus and the directrix. So HK is going to be like x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2, right? Because that's the midpoint formula. So I have x1, which is 5, plus x2, which is 5, divided by 2. And then I have y1, which is 1, plus y2, which is negative 1, divided by 2. So 5 plus 5 is 10. 10 over 2 is 5. 1 plus negative 1 is 0. 0 divided by 2 is 0. So that's going to be my vertex at HK. So the absolute value of P is going to be half the distance between the focus and the directrix. Okay? So if the parabola opens up like this one does, P is going to be greater than 0. So let's find the distance between the focus and the directrix and divide it by 2. So remember, the distance is given by the distance formula, which is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So in this case, I have x2 minus x1 squared. So that is going to be 5 minus 5 squared plus y2 minus y1. So I have negative 1 minus 1 squared. So that is going to be the square root of 0 squared plus negative 2 squared, right? So that's just going to be the square root of 4, which is 2. So that is going to be the like double P, right? Because the absolute value of P is going to be half the distance between this. So the absolute value of P is going to be half of 2. So that means that P is equal to 1. Okay, so now I just plug into this formula. I have x minus h. Remember, this is h, this is k. So x minus 5 squared equals 4 times P, which is 1, and then times y minus 0, right? K is 0. So that means that x minus 5 squared equals 4 times y. Okay, so now let's match it to the correct answer choice. So that is going to be answer choice D, right? We have x minus 5 squared equals 4 times y. Be careful with the negative signs, right? So that's why we don't choose C. So in this problem, it wants us to find the equation of the parabola, the focus, negative 8, negative 3, and directrix x equals negative 2. So I think it's always helpful to kind of sketch a coordinate plane and get a picture of what this parabola kind of looks like. So the focus of negative 8, negative 3 means the focus is going to be down here. And the directrix is as x equals negative 2. So that's going to be like here. So that means my parabola is going to be a sideways parabola, and it's going to open up to the left. So the HK is going to be the midpoint. So we have HK equals, let's create a point on our directrix. So that point is going to be at negative 2, negative 3. So we have negative 8 plus negative 2 over 2, and then negative 3 plus negative 3 over 2. So that means that HK, so negative 8 plus negative 2 is going to be negative 10. Negative 10 divided by 2 is going to be negative 5. Negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Now let's find the distance between the focus and the directrix. So we're going to do the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So that is going to give us the square root of negative 2 plus 8. So that's going to be 6 squared plus negative 3 minus negative 3 is going to be plus. So that's going to be 0 squared. So that's the square root of 6 squared, which equals 6. And that is going to be half the distance between the focus and the directrix. Okay, so P is actually going to equal 3. And remember, if the parabola opens to the left, P is going to be less than 0. So P is going to be negative 3. So now we have y minus, and let's see, this is h and k. So y minus negative 3 squared equals 4 times p, which is negative 3, times x minus negative 5. So minus negative becomes plus, so we have y plus 3 squared equals negative 12 times x, and that's going to become a plus, so we have x plus 5. So that is going to match answer choice A. So in this problem, it says, what is the effect on the graph of the function f of x equals the square root of x if it's transformed to the equation g of x equals 9 square root of x? So 9 is a value of a, and notice that it is going to be a vertical stretch if a is bigger than 1. 9 is bigger than 1, right? The absolute value of 9 is greater than 1, so it's going to be stretched vertically. So in this problem, it says to write the quadratic function f of x equals x squared plus 8x plus 3 in vertex form. So to write in vertex form, we need to do completing the square. So I'm going to separate out the x squared plus bx term, and then I'm going to put the plus c term a little bit further away. So in this case, I'm going to do x squared plus 8x. And then the reason I put it further away is because I'm going to need to add something here, okay? And then I have plus c, which is my 3, right? Because this is a, b, and c. Okay, so what do I add here? What I do is I take the value of b, in this case it's 8, I divide it by 2, and then I square it. Okay, so 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then 4 squared is 16. So if I do something to an equation, if I add 16 here, I have to subtract 16 in order to balance it out. So what happens here is I took this and I transformed it into a perfect square trinomial. Okay, it's a perfect square trinomial that can be written as x plus b over 2, right? B is 8, 8 divided by 2, which is 4. Okay, so it's x plus 4 squared, and then I have 3 minus 16, right? So 3 minus 16 is just going to be minus 13. Okay, so that's how I've transformed my equation into vertex form. So notice that the answer choice that matches is answer choice C. So in this problem, it says to solve the equation x squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. So remember, when we solve a quadratic, we want to make sure it's set equal to 0. So you can solve by graphing quadratic formula or by factoring. So when we, factor or do quadratic formula, you have to identify a, b, and c, right? B is going to be negative 1. So if I solve by factoring, I do c equals negative 12. So I'm going to need a positive factor and a negative factor. If I list out the factors of 12, they're 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Since 1 is negative, I'm going to make my bigger factor negative, and then the smaller factors I'm going to leave as positive. So 1 and negative 12 is negative 11, doesn't work. 2 and negative 6 is negative 4, so that doesn't work. 3 and negative 4 does add to negative 1. So I can factor this as x plus 3 times x minus 4 equals 0. Then I can set each factor equal to 0 and solve for my values of x. So that gives me x equals negative 3 and x equals positive 4. So that's how I can get answer choice B. If you would like to do so, and I know some of you prefer it this way, you can solve using the quadratic formula, right? You can say that a equals 1, b equals negative 1, and c equals negative 12. So when you plug in, you get x equals negative b, so that's going to be negative 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12 divided by 2 times a. So that's going to be x equals 1 plus or minus the square root. And then so we have 1, I'm just going to do the second part of my calculator. So I have 1 minus 4 times 1 times negative 12. So that's going to be 49. And that's over 2. So this is going to be x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7 over 2. So that gives you two solutions, which is 1 plus 7 over 2, which equals 8 over 2, so that's 4. 1 minus 7 over 2, which is negative 6 over 2, so that's negative 3. Okay, so you get the same solution either way. If you graph, you're just going to look for the two x-intercepts. You're going to look for the places where the graph crosses the x-axis to find your solutions. So let's try now solving this equation. This is a square root equation. Okay, so when we solve a square root equation, remember we want to get the square root by itself, and then we're going to square both sides. So when we square both sides, on the left we have 2x plus 15, and then on the right side we have x squared. So now notice this is a quadratic, so we want to set it equal to 0, right? We want it to be an ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. So I'm going to subtract 2x and I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. Okay, so I'm going to do that so I can set it all equal to 0. So on the left, it's all going to cancel. So I have 0 equals x squared minus 2x minus 15. So my preference to solve quadratics is to factor. If you prefer to use the quadratic formula, feel free to do so, but I'm just going to solve by factoring. So I have c equals negative 15. Okay, so since it's negative, I need a positive and a negative factor. I'm going to list out the factors of 15. So I have 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. My 2 here is negative, so I'm going to make my bigger factor negative. And see, 1 and negative 15 is negative 14, so that's no good. So 3 and 5 is my correct combination. So I have 0 equals x plus 3 times x minus 5. So now I set each factor equal to 0, and I am going to solve for x. So I have x equals negative 3 and x equals positive 5. Remember, whenever you're working with square root equations, you want to plug in and make sure that you're not getting any extraneous solutions. So when I go ahead and plug into my equation, if I plug in negative 3, I get the square root of 2 times negative 3 plus 15 equals negative 3, right? So that's the square root of negative 6 plus 15 equals negative 3, which tells me the square root of 9 equals negative 3, which does not work because that's saying that 3 equals negative 3. So this is going to be an extraneous solution. X equals 5 is the only solution that works if I plug it into my problem, right? Because I get the square root of 2 times 5 plus 15 equals 5. So that tells me that the square root of 2 times 5 is 10. 10 plus 15 is 25. So the square root of 25 equals 5, which tells me that 5 equals 5. So that does work. So B is the only correct answer choice. Always be careful.